Hi again. In Jewish Monotheism and Christian Trinitarian Doctrine, Pinchas Lapide in dialogue with Jurgen Moltmann. And Pinchas Lapide at this point is talking about the Jewish attitude towards Trinitarians. That is the thinking Jewish attitude. That is the attitude of the rabbis and the more profound theologians of the Old Testament religion. What was their response to the Trinity as it developed in medieval times and beyond, compared to, let's say, the Muslim response to Trinitarian beliefs? Lapide says it is against this background of a radical, uncompromisingly understood monotheism that we must discuss the Jewish reactions to the Trinitarian doctrine of the Church. The average Jew today considers the Trinity at best a kind of heavenly triumvirate, and at worst a tritheism, which is reminiscent of a relapse into paganism, and nevertheless in both cases much too like polytheism to still earn the name of monotheism. Not so those learned in the scriptures of Judaism, who already in the Talmud described the Trinity of the Church as shituf, in English, bring together, a concept which Islam later, as shirk, made the spear point of its church critique. Consequently, the Quran completely, in the sense of the first Tanaim, stated thus: "Speak, your God is the only God. There is no God outside of God. All those are infidels who maintain that God is the third of three, whereas there is only one. If they do not cease to declare this, a painful fate will be their portion." The Talmud fathers here are somewhat more mild-hearted than the Prophet Muhammad, in that they maintain that this Trinitarian association indeed constricts pure monotheism, but is no mortal sin, as is, for example, serving idols. Thus we read in the tractate Sanhedrin of the Talmud that the same behavior is attributed to the people of Israel, namely at the occasion of the worship of the golden calf at the foot of Mount Sinai. From out of their mouths of the wavering ones in Israel it was said, "These are your gods, Israel, who led you out of Egypt." That's Exodus 32 verse 4. However, since they used the plural, says the Talmud, they therefore did not adore the calf alone, but rather they bound together true worship of God with the worship of idols. Thanks to this association, which may not be equated to an elimination of God, they were spared destruction. In this sense, the Jews reckon the Christians already in the 4th century by associators, as they called them, who, as Paul would have said, perceive that the Godhead darkly through a distorted mirror, or give worship to the creature rather than the Creator. But, it is very big, but here, still do not have a clear vision of the one God. Only in the 9th century did a serious exchange between Christian and Jewish scholars take place, in the midst of which Saadia Gaon, the head of the Talmudic Academy at Sura in Babylonia, could write, quote, "I do not have the common crowd in mind, which is only able to speak of a Trinity in a gross sense. I do not wish to burden my book with rebuttals of these. I much rather wish to rebut the thinkers among them who imagine themselves to believe in a Trinity in a subtle thought pattern," end of quote. After an implicit objection that the Church Fathers had dropped the letter U in order to construct once again from the word triunitas, the original trinitas of Tertullian, Saadia declared to his fellow Jews that with educated Christians the situation is as if they said that they prayed to a burning hot one, to a bright shining one, and to a climbing to heaven one, without, however, composing the matter or explaining that it all pertains to one and the same fire. Here Saadia relies on the Augustinian doctrine of the Trinity in order to explain to his Jewish readers that the Trinity arises of the hypostatization of the three divine attributes of essence, life, and omniscience. From this he draws the conclusion that all of this indeed contradicts the Jewish understanding of God, but that in spite of this, the Christians should be acknowledged not as disguised idol worshippers, but rather as genuine, if also odd, monotheists. This view has found a home in broad circles of believing Judaism since the High Middle Ages. One of the bases for this reconciliatory position, which Islam to this very day has not been able to partake of, perhaps in the many triadic, in no way Trinitarian traces which are to be found in Judaism. To begin with, a most famous case in point. Why is it often written in the Bible, asked the rabbis, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob? Is there not only one God in heaven and on earth? And the Holy Scripture, which knows no lack, also knows no superfluous word. Therefore, why does it not say plainly and simply, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, instead of emphasizing a half dozen times, as even Jesus, in his dispute with the Sadducees, repeated, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? The answer to this puzzle, which one might feel is a petty matter, came out gradually in a centuries-long debate. The solution stated, the single creator God of the whole world was experienced by the three patriarchs, each in his own way, each according to his own destiny, each in his God-willed individuality. Abraham experienced the Lord as the God who leads out of the security of the safe Mesopotamia, which indeed was protected but was idolatrous, into the total uncertainty and lack of assurance of the promised land. Isaac, his son, experienced the Lord as the Redeemer God, who rescued him at the last moment on Mount Moriah from the sacrificial death by the knife of his own father. Jacob, the grandson, however, experienced God as the wrestling angel who struggled with him throughout the whole night until he could wring from him a blessing at dawn, a blessing for himself and the new name, Israel. Israel, the wrestler against God, not the one who wrestles for God, but rather the stout battler who fights with his God, a quality which the ancestral father bequeathed, along with his name, to the whole people. Thus, it is right that it says in the Bible, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, for it concerns three different experiences of God, which indeed fundamentally differ from each other. However, similarly legitimate and authentically genuine are the views of God of the synagogue, the church, and the mosque, the Trinity of the monotheism of our present-day world. So, summary, some of this is a little tangled and difficult for us who are not used to long sentences and long paragraphs, but the summary is that Islam responds differently to Christian Trinitarianism than does rabbinical thinking. And for the XJW community, this is something to think seriously about, in that we recoil from Trinitarian belief in much the same way that the Muslims do. Not at all like the rabbis. Pinchas Lapide represents, as an Orthodox Jew, that community. Next time, why the Jewish response is so different from the cult response to the Trinity and Islam's response.